Tonight, exclusive snap polling on Rishi Sunak's conference speech. The verdict? People quite like his new policies, but they're not so keen on him. But there is hope for the Prime Minister. Party members liked his big set-piece moment. And as for the announcements, well, axing HS2 has also gone down well, as has his smoking crackdown. We'll ask if a political trap has now been set for Labour and Keir Starmer. Does he back Rishi Sunak's changes or not? And social media wrongly suspects foul play on a Downing Street post. We'll have a look at some past Photoshop faux pas. All that and more with Nick Ferrari and Ayesha Hazarika, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Well, all of that to come, but I just want to bring you the very latest on the war in Ukraine, because at least 50 people have been killed in what may well turn out to be one of the deadliest attacks on civilians since the conflict began. We'll also be hearing from the Prime Minister and his reaction in a moment. A 6-year-old boy is said to be among those who died when a Russian missile hit a cafe and a shop near Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine. President Zelensky, who's in Spain for a European summit, described the attack as a brutal Russian crime.
We all have to stay in a special unity, stay together, in a special cooperation and in a special relationship with everyone else in the European Union. We all need a format of support for the nations whose lives Russia has already tried to destroy, so that the ruin caused by Russia can never spread anywhere else. All these countries need economic support, it's true, and all these countries need security guarantees, so that Russia will not even be tempted to try to break their sovereignty even again.
Well, in the last hour, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has given his response.
Well, what you've seen here today at the EPC summit is strong support for Ukraine, for President Zelensky. I just sat down with him before coming to talk to you. The UK is steadfast in its commitment to Ukraine, not just today, but for the long term. And one of the things that we put on the agenda a while ago was for countries to sign up to long-term security commitments and guarantees for Ukraine. That's something that we announced a while ago, and now many other countries have followed our lead and are putting into place those arrangements, which will give Ukraine the extra resources that it needs.
Well, Sky's Moscow correspondent Anna Magne joins us now from the newsroom. And look, it's easy to become almost desensitised to some of the horrors in Ukraine, but the details of this are just shocking. You know, cafe, a shop, a 6-year-old boy. What happened?
Exactly, and if you look at the pictures, this place has been absolutely devastated. It looks like, the apocalypse, as so many moments in Ukraine have done this past year and a half. But this was a small village of just 300 people, and we understand that people were gathered in this cafe after a funeral wake. So they were all just sitting there, and the Interior Minister of Ukraine said, there would be somebody from every family, from every courtyard, who will have been lost in today's missile strike, which we believe was an Iskander missile. Now, obviously, Russia never says that it hits civilian targets. It says that it only ever targets military or energy infrastructure. They haven't given an official comment yet. Vladimir Putin was speaking at a big foreign policy summit today, and he said that Ukraine wouldn't last longer than a week without the military and financial support from the West. And that may or may not be true, but that's certainly the way Volodymyr Zelensky feels it too, which is why you saw such an impassioned plea for support from Europe at that conference in Granada today, as he's concerned that there may be cracks in the edifice, certainly in the United States, about continued support for Ukraine and also in Europe.
Diana, thank you very much indeed. Diana Magne there on the latest strike in Ukraine. And you can find out more on the war in Ukraine by scanning the QR code that you can see on your screen now. Well, it does feel like news like that puts UK politics rather in perspective, doesn't it? But I do want to return, that said, to the UK, because I want to talk to you about party members. An incredibly unrepresentative sample of the population. whether Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, SNP. I think it's fair to say that there's not a single party in Britain whose membership is an accurate reflection of the general public. And our exclusive polling tonight really does show that. Just 4% of the general public thought Rishi Sunak's speech was excellent. Exactly the same number, 4% of Conservative Party members thought it was very poor. And if you look at those who actually did watch the speech, well, 46% of the general public thought it was very poor, and 46% of the Tory membership thought it was, yeah, you guessed it, excellent. Now, I actually had to double check those numbers to check they were right. But yeah, the view of the membership was pretty much, effectively, the complete opposite of the general public. And you know what? This does actually matter, because party members choose their leader, not Rishi Sunak, but in general they do. So they have a disproportionate say over the way our country is run. I'm not just picking on the Conservatives, it's the same with Labour and all the other parties. So if you want to have a totally disproportionate influence over the UK, there's one very easy way to do it, and it'll only cost you a few quid a month. So there you go. Well, his conference speech yesterday was trailed as a chance for Rishi Sunak to make a mark on a party who didn't elect him as leader and a general public that didn't vote for him to be Prime Minister. And the pollsters, Find Out Now, have carried out an exclusive snap poll for us as soon as he'd finished speaking yesterday, looking at two groups, right? So they looked at the general public and party members. So let's have a look at what they thought, because the public's poll, firstly, came back came back with some pretty interesting results. Let's have a quick look, because 18%, as I was saying, of the general public, here we go, thought the speech was very poor. 4% said it was excellent. 61% didn't watch it or listen to it at all. Let's have a look now at the Conservative members' reaction to this speech. So here we go, 4% saying it was very poor, 34% saying it was excellent, 25% didn't listen, admitting they didn't listen to their party leader at conference. So you can see the complete contrast there. And we can also, I think, have a quick look at some of the policy announcements too. HS2, that was a decision that provoked anger from former Prime Ministers, mayors and businesses. But what about the public and Conservative members? Well, here we go. This is the public's point of view. You can see they're actually pretty split. Most saying that they don't know. 34% saying that, yeah, they do agree with scrapping HS2, the second leg, reinvesting the money for different projects, and 27% saying they disagree with that. Members, well, they were even more positive about it. It went down really well with Conservative Party members. 66%, two-thirds, saying that they're in favour of scrapping HS2 and reinvesting the money in local projects. And yeah, OK, it caused consternation in some places. West Midlands Mayor Andy Street was very angry. But only 18% of Conservative members said they were against the changes. So overall, I think Downing Street would be pretty happy with that. Let's have a look at one of the other big policy announcements now, shall we? Raising the legal age of smoking by 1 year every year in England to tackle what the Prime Minister called the biggest cause of preventable death and disease in our country. So nationally, you can see this has got a clear majority of people in favour, 61% supporting that, with 16% saying they disagree. And the results among Conservative Party members are even more starker. So it could actually surprise people because, you know, we've heard from libertarian Conservatives like Truss who weren't happy with the announcements. But the wider party, 81% of them were in favour of that smoking crackdown, with only 12% disagreeing. So very, very stark on the policies. Let's have a little chat, shall we, to our panel. We can bring in broadcaster Nick Ferrari and Ayesha Hazarika, also a broadcaster, former Labour Party advisor as well. Great to have you with us. Well, in a way, it's like shock horror. Members of political parties are not like the general public. But it is quite stark, I guess, isn't it, Ayesha? What do you think?
Well, look, there is always a big disconnect, I think, between people who are party members and members of the public. You have to be a particular type of person to be a member of a political party. And often what you can find is that, you know, the more committed a party member is, the more out of touch they can be with actually where the public is. You know, they take more of an interest in what's happening with the minutiae. But I think what's interesting about the policies as well is sometimes individual policies can poll quite well. That doesn't mean that the leader or the party is going to win the next general election if there isn't a kind of an overriding theme or a narrative. And having been at Manchester, I thought that what was quite interesting is there wasn't really a coherence to these policies. They were quite individual policies. There wasn't like a big story linking them to get out at conference in Manchester in a former railway station. You literally couldn't make it up. The smoking thing, look, undoubtedly, I think it's a good policy. I think it's a good public policy health. Is it the biggest issue facing young people today when you look at things like the state of schools, you look at housing, you look at mental health services?
Someone put it to me that young people aren't smoking anyway. This is like banning dinosaurs. Like, you know, it's like... What's the, you know?
It feels like if this had been a policy introduced even maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been incredibly radical, but he sort of feels like he's pushing an already open door here.
What do you make of Rishi Sunak's polling numbers, the snap
Let's be
actions?
candid. Conferences are hell. There is no other way to describe it. They are, if your viewers now can, it's like a Butlins holiday camp you can't get out of without any of the fun. It's more why than hidey-hi. Why the hell am I here? And I only go because I'm paid. The idea I would go...
we quite enjoy it.
We quite like
the
it.
idea I would
We
use
quite
my
like
own
it.
money
We've got
to
nice
go
time.
there. I think they are absolutely ghastly. But anyway, if you enjoy them. What I think is brilliant, and this does show the state of the Conservative Party, doesn't it? 1 in 4 of his own party members didn't even watch the Prime Minister speak, which I find incredible. What do I take from your poll? I'll tell you what I find most interesting, actually, which I was reflecting on the train coming back, whenever it was. We have been told by the Prime Minister that the most important thing is the economy, that we have to push back inflation. It's like a tax on your salary. And yet, in that speech, we heard about all sorts of things that make the Conservatives angry. They get angry about the school exams. They get angry about how the health service run. They get angry about human rights. They even get angry about driving at 20 miles an hour, for God's sake. Never mind, they've been in power for 13 years. This makes the Conservatives very angry. But where was the economy? Mr Sunak, you've been the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You've told us that this is your drive. I am going to get... You didn't mention the bloody thing, which I found quite extraordinary.
Yeah. I really agree with that. I mean, the other thing I thought was fascinating, you go back a few years, let's say when George Osborne was Chancellor, the Chancellor's speech would be one of the big agenda-setting moments of conference. You know, George Osborne's speech would not just have fiscal policy in it, would often have big political traps. Here, you saw Jeremy Hunt reduced to a sort of couple of bad Barbie jokes. There's a rude joke about Ken, but I'm not going to go there.
You know, later,
I'll tell you that. You and I can tell. We can
okay,
have that chat later. You know, talking about reheating some austerity measures. You know, cracking down on benefits. How many times have we heard that? Cracking down on the civil service. How many times have we heard that?
That's brilliant.
No big announcements.
They're angry. There are so many civil servants. The Conservatives have hired these civil servants. They keep getting angry about these things. They're all of their own making.
But just one thing to add about that. They might be angry at having so many civil servants, but look at the backlogs on the asylum delays, on trying to get your driving licence or your passport. If you're now saying you're going to get rid of these civil servants, what's going to happen to these backlogs?
Quick thought from you, Ayesha, before we move on. What should Labour do about HS2?
Well, I think Labour is in a difficult position. I think Keir Starmer's just come out this afternoon and said, look, we can't commit to restoring it because he thinks they're already cracking on with, you know, selling back land and you know, getting rid of contractors. I think what he has committed to is saying that he'll work with the Northern mayors to try and do that bit at the top, which is the Northern Powerhouse. I think he should. The other person I think Keir Starmer should really bring into the fold and sit down and chat to is the Tory West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street. He is raging. I've heard that he might even leave the Conservative Party over this. So I think Labour should get the two Andys together, Andy Burnham and Andy Street, to sort this out.
I'd put Andy Street in charge of it. This is the man who ran John Lewis absolutely brilliantly, so he knows the commercial side. You've just alluded to the political side. He's from the West Midlands. He feels it. He believes in those people. This should have worked. The reason it has to be scrapped is because of the cost overruns. 168 million pounds on its PR. Its PR is like Vladimir Putin. How you could spend 168 million pounds to these Herberts who've done such bad PR? Get a businessman or woman in there, shake it down. But I think Keir will fight shy of it.
Thanks for chatting. I get a feeling it's going to be a lively one tonight. So, yeah, look forward to that.
I'll try and keep it
now, let's look now a little bit more about what our polling tells us about the Prime Minister's own political standing. So this is what our polling says. Do you think Rishi Sunak is doing well or badly in his job as Prime Minister? This is the general public, right? So 18% say he's doing well, badly. Well, it's clearly higher. 48% say he is doing badly. 13% don't know. 21%. Very undecisive, 21% say he's doing neither. And let's look at the next slide, shall we? Here we go, as if by magic. Now, this is the one that I find really interesting. Who would you prefer to be the leader of the Conservative Party? Now, this is Conservative members. 50% say Rishi Sunak, very loyal, on brand, this is what they're supposed to be saying. Penny Mordaunt, she is the sword-carrying fame, 16%. Look at this guy. Nigel Farage, third most popular choice, 13%. I've got to get a bit of reaction from you two to this. Are you surprised by this, Nigel Farage?
No, because I think the Conservative conference was one of the most schizophrenic I can remember for some time. There were at least, 3 or 4 people clearly making plays to be the next leader. You look at people like Kemi Badenoch, you look at possibly Penny Mordaunt, even Liz Truss, the return of Truss, it seems incredible. So, no, I'm not surprised. Let's come back to... Look, Nigel Farage is an extraordinary force in politics, absolute Marmite figure. I think it shows the state in which the Conservative Party is now. If in doubt, move to the right, always seems to have been their mantra, and that's what I take from this.
I mean, the person I'd like to see pulled in that, you mentioned Kemi Badenoch, definitely Suella Braverman. I felt that she was the darling of Conservative Party conference. It felt that the one speech that really did electrify party members, and certainly people I spoke to, was Suella Braverman's speech. Now, it's not my cup of tea at all, but she had a strong narrative. She's got a strong message. Everywhere I went, people were saying she's the one to watch. And again, as Nick says, that gives you a strong direction of travel. To me, it felt like it was two things. It felt both like a party dying in terms of this bit of the party. It felt like, slow decline. But on the other hand, it felt like the rebirth, or looking to the birth of the opposition Conservative Party. Who was going to be the architect of that? Was it going to... You had David Gauke there for the first time in 4 years, but his wing of the party is nowhere to be seen. It is all about the... Priti Patel was out and about, being very... It's all about the Suella Bravermans, the Priti Patels and the Nigel Farages.
I felt that too. I actually thought the conference would be a lot more dead, basically, and more empty, but it wasn't. It was full, it was buzzing, but it was buzzing, like, not to win this election, but almost what comes after.
But it was only buzzing because it's a bit like Les Miserables without without
You
the
really
hassle
didn't have
and
a good time, did you?
because there's such revolt and revolution on there, isn't it?
Well, exactly.
That's why it's buzzing.
Yeah, exactly right.
At least 4 have got their own game plan, haven't they? And we're all with the media, quite rightly watch it because we have to present it to our listeners or our viewers. So that's what gave it an injection of life. I agree with you.
Right.
It felt like it was the beginning of a beauty parade for the leadership contest, right?
Exactly. And actually, the Prime Minister's speech was one of the least interesting bits of it, because all of it, you're kind of fascinated by Suella Braverman, you want to know what Liz Truss is up to,
I mean, I had this moment where I was like in the Midland Hotel, which for listeners, it's like the main conference hotel at Manchester. A lot of action happens there. And twice somebody said, oh, do you mind just, very politely, would you mind just standing out the way? And then something went past, and afterwards went, who was that? What was that? And I think it was Rishi Sunak. Whereas, in years gone by, if it was Boris Johnson or anyone, there'd be a media scrum, there'd be this kind of crackle in the air. That vibe was just not there for Rishi Sunak.
Really interesting to talk. I'm cutting you off. Sorry, Nick. I'll come back to you soon. Earlier, I did get a bit of reaction to the polling from the former Business Secretary, Andrea Leadsom. But first, I asked her about how she found Conservative Conference.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I think there was a real buzz, actually. I understand that we had the biggest fringe ever and more delegates than ever before, or in 10 years, or something in living history anyway. So, yeah, it was good. It was incredibly busy. It's always exhausting. But I think people certainly came away with a real sense that Rishi is making some big, strategic, long-term decisions, and that's what people want to see.
That might have been the feeling among people that you were talking to, but the polling that we've got today suggests that actually among people who were viewing the speech from home, normal people, normal voters, if you like, had a bit of a different view. 18%, or I should say, of those who watched or listened, 46% saying it was very poor, and then only 10% saying it was excellent. So the highest number thinking it was not that good.
Yes. So, I mean, obviously, the next question is, well, what didn't they like about it? I mean, Rishi was putting 3 pretty major policies out there. One, to change this, in my view, always disastrous project of HS2 to save a considerable amount that is due to be spent. Secondly, to transform A-levels. That is a very big long-term decision to improve 16 to 18 education. And then the third thing is to try to make smoking less culturally acceptable. And even for parents who smoked for many years, nobody wants their children to smoke. So actually, again, that's a really good long-term decision for the benefit of the country.
So the polling did actually suggest that people quite like those policies.
Right.
So, the smoking and also high-speed rail. Do you think the problem's actually him?
I think Rishi is a really good person. I mean, he and I have been friends ever since he became an MP in 2015, and we were working together on the Fresh Start project to look at reforms of the EU. And he's a very smart guy. And, I mean, it is possible people don't always like a particular individual or a particular speech. But I do think, you know, certainly for the Conservative members who were there and people who weren't Conservatives, commentators said, yeah, they thought he'd done really well. It was very compelling. You can see his warmth as a person. He's clearly very competent and able. I think his wife, Akshata's contribution to start with was really generous-hearted, and it gave a really good angle, I think, to the whole conference speech.
Conservative members agreed with you. 45% of them said it was excellent.
Oh, good.
But weirdly, it was kind of almost the exact opposite of the general public. I mean, is that the issue, that Conservative members are so out of touch with what the wider public opinion seems to be?
Well, I just don't think so. I mean, as you've said yourself, people liked the policies. And so, you know, I totally understand that people are always a bit disgruntled with a government that's been around for a while. But what Rishi has clearly set out is that he represents change. He's looking at the longer term. He's looking at making some of the big decisions that are really going to take our country forward. So I think we need to give people time to really get used to his ways. And I love the fact that he is so keen on the family. He used the phrase that love cascades down the generations. I found that really just touching and so true for so many people. You know, it's your community, it's your family, it's the people you love that you want to help and support. And I think to have a Prime Minister saying that was very heartwarming.
We also asked Conservative members who they'd like to see as the next lead of the party. Nigel Farage was the third most popular.
Oh, really? OK. Well, that's odd. Depends who you ask, I suppose.
I'll be honest, he was at Conservative Party conference. He seemed to be going down a storm.
You know, conferences always do have a wide range of views, and in particular on the fringe, which is where Nigel Farage was, you do get all sorts of thoughts and ideas presented from all sorts of different characters. I mean, Nigel Farage, he is a big character, so it's quite likely that people who've had a couple of glasses of something and who are listening to some sort of very punchy, rabble-rousing speech probably did enjoy it. But, you know, the same way you might enjoy a good comedy sketch or, you know, a good rousing conversation about a ancient philosopher or something, it doesn't mean that you think they should be the next leader.
Well, apart from quite a few of your members
possibly a few of them enjoyed that speech too much then.
Do you accept that it feels like the Conservative Party may be edging further towards the right?
Oh, no, definitely not. No, I think what Rishi Sunak is a pragmatic politician, and yes, he is of the centre-right. His values are those of the British public. You know, he's very in favour of strong families, strong communities, public services being a good, strong safety net. But at the same time, people must be able to go about their daily lives. You know, he spoke very powerfully about how we've got to stop violent and persistent protests. We've got to stop the strikes that are preventing people from having the vital care and help and train journeys and so on that they need. And it is about a balance. It's a balance of rights and responsibilities. And I think Rishi's heart is absolutely in the right place.
Can we talk about HS2?
Yes.
It feels to me like it's a bit embarrassing. You know, we've been talking about HS2 for about 15 years. I mean, I think I was just left university when we first started talking about this, for goodness sake. I mean, and yet, here we are, and we've scrapped half of it. I mean, why can't we just build a rail line?
You're making me feel old, Sophie. I was just about to become an MP when it was first mooted.
But it's a long time. You get my point.
Oh, completely get your point. And I've been implacably opposed to this project right from the start. And the reason for that is simply on grounds of value for taxpayers' money. And so, you know, it is quite bittersweet. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that Rishi has taken the right decision. You know, with every change of Prime Minister, I have argued strongly that we should scrap HS2 because it doesn't offer value for taxpayers. I mean, right from the start, a lot of the benefit was predicated on the fact that you couldn't work on a train. But then we had Wi-Fi, within a couple of years of the project getting off the ground. And also the fact that it had to be 250 miles an hour, and then suddenly the language changed and it was all about capacity. Well, if it was about capacity, you would have a much more sensitive route through the country instead of straight through Grade 1 listed, ancient woodland, you know, English Civil War battlefield sites, farms, you name it. So in my view, it's always been a bad project. I'm so pleased the Prime Minister's decided to stop the taps of money flowing. It goes through my constituency. And honestly, I have seen the revolving doorway, people staying for 3 months and then moving on, a lack of community engagement. My constituents have suffered immeasurably, some of them, with their livelihood, with farms that have been in their families for generations. It has been absolutely terrible and continues to be. You know, it looks like an industrial site in this beautiful rural part of England's countryside.
And you've got an idea for how to spend some of this money, right? This is your chance to make the pitch.
Thank you. Yes. So actually, my constituency, South Northamptonshire, is home to the British Grand Prix. So Silverstone Circuit is in my patch. And just after the Grand Prix, the chief executive wrote to me saying, we would like to fund a Silverstone halt that would stop on the HS2 line during the 4 days of the British Grand Prix, and we could help to pay for that. And so I've already written some months ago, to the DfT to say, let's do this. Anyway, now I genuinely think that with everything changing, the Prime Minister's made clear the money that we won't be spending on continuing with further legs of HS2, £36 billion, will be available for infrastructure projects in the Midlands and the North. So a train station at Silverstone would be fantastic for my area, but also it would get rid of so many of the traffic jams and so on.
Coming up on the Politics Hub, Rishi Sunak has exchanged a conference row over trains for Spain and a meeting of European political leaders. Is the deal on tackling migration on the cards?
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise.
Katie Spencer, Sky News in London.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. Cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. Made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, Rishi Sunak has been meeting European leaders at a summit in Spain to discuss closer cooperation on migration. We heard from the Prime Minister a little while ago.
What I was able to do here for the British people is sign new deals with Serbia, Belgium and Bulgaria. That will help combat the criminal gangs upstream, but also chaired a meeting together with the leaders from France, from the Netherlands, Italy, the EU and Albania, where we talked through this issue together. Now, all of these things are making a difference. The numbers of people coming into the UK this year are down by a fifth. They're up in the rest of Europe. That shows that these types of arrangements that we have are helping us to stop the boats. But what's clear is this is a shared European problem, and everyone agrees that it should be everyone's own country that decides who comes there and not criminal gangs.
Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue. Ali, what's been going on?
Well, he's obviously had a busy few days, pretty cosy scene in Europe. He, this morning, co-chaired a meeting with Giorgia Meloni of Italy. They want to talk about immigration, not necessarily what all the other European leaders want to talk about. In fact, it wasn't actually on the main agenda, AI, Ukraine, where that was kind of what Spain wanted to focus on. But we're seeing Rishi Sunak, I think, not for the first time, bringing up immigration on the European stage. I mean, you heard that clip there. He was obviously talking to an audience back home. The big kind of announcement, if you like, is these deals with countries like Belgium, Bulgaria, Serbia, over more intelligence sharing, more work to tackle smuggling gangs. You would not be wrong to say, have we heard this before? I think the answer is yes. I don't necessarily think that is going to kind of shift the dial on immigration in this country.
It's so interesting to hear you say that this wasn't even supposed to be on the agenda. I mean, I guess that just shows what a key part of his domestic message tackling migration is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, obviously this is one of his top 5 priorities. Obviously, this is a massive thing that Rishi Sunak wants to talk about. I think what's also really interesting with the European dynamic is European relations have been a bit better under Rishi Sunak. We're talking today about Frontex, which looks like it's in its final stages, this European deal. He's also done a deal with Horizon, the science programme, obviously the Windsor framework. So relations are a little bit better, but he wants to set a dividing line with Labour, pitch Labour, Keir Starmer as a Europhile. So it's kind of an uneasy dynamic line that he's trying to tread, but a pretty cosy scene in Europe today.
Thanks very much, Ali. Good to have you on the programme. Coming up on the Politics Hub. Conservative conference set an assault course of political traps for the Labour leader. Will Keir Starmer fall into any then? We'll discuss next with the former head of policy for the party under Jeremy Corbyn. welcome back. Well, let's take a look now at which stories we've been covering on our digital political hub, which has been across all of today's developments. We can have a quick look. Firstly, here we go. Reporting restrictions are in place, so we're not going to be chatting about it here, but the polls are currently open in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. They close at 10 o'clock tonight, and our very own John Craig is there to give full coverage of the result. That will be in the early hours of the morning. So I would say make sure you tune in for that. Set those alarms, either stay up late, get up early, whatever it is. Lots of John Craig later on this evening. Now, the Prime Minister's statement in his speech that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, that's just common sense. It might even have got the biggest cheer. But the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, speaking to Kay Burley this morning, was forced to deny that the comment was a breach of equality legislation. And if you want some really interesting analysis of the Prime Minister's situation post-conference, do check out this piece from our political editor, Beth Rigby, where she points out the irony that his long-term plan has some very short-term political calculations driving it. Plus, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Well, Conservative conference is over. We're going to be heading to Liverpool for Labour conference next week, but events in Manchester this week will surely force a response from Keir Starmer, because it feels like there's been a series of political elephant traps set for his party by Rishi Sunak, not least on HS2. The Labour leader was asked about the scrapping earlier today.
I think the government's made a complete mess of HS2 over 13 years. They've lost control of the project. Billions of pounds have been invested and now lost. Many, many promises have been made which are now broken. I can't stand here and say and commit to reversing that decision. They've taken a wrecking ball to it. I don't think anybody's been taken in by the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday, where he basically reheated existing projects and pretended they were alternatives to HS2. Most of those had already been announced many times over, and I don't think that he should expect the British public to believe a word that he says on this.
Well, let's speak now to Andrew Fisher, columnist for The Eye, former Executive Director of Policy for the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Do you agree with the analysis, then, that there has been a series of elephant traps set for Keir Starmer as this conference approaches?
Only if you walk into them. I think if you're bold and you know what you stand for, nothing in politics is an elephant trap, really. And so on HS2, I think Labour has got a policy document going to the conference saying we fully back HS2 in full, which I assume to mean the original plan all the way to Scotland, actually, and the HS3 spur. That should be the position, I think, still. You know, Labour's committed a hell of a lot of money, 28 billion a year. This is a one-off £36 billion cut that's actually being reinvested elsewhere. So there's no problem, really, for Labour financially. They've said they're going to make this money. They may as well kind of give some demonstrable ways of spending this, because HS2 is a really valuable scheme. It will cut emissions. It reduces journey times. It's clearly going to create jobs and growth and help, spur growth in the north, rather than, always investing in the overheating London and the South East. So it's a really beneficial scheme. It's
interesting you mentioned the 28 billion. That's the Green Prosperity Plan, the money that Labour's committed to kind of green policies. I mean, is there an argument that HS2 could be repackaged as part of that?
I think it could be. I think it should be, because if you look at what's happened in other countries, where you've got high-speed rail. In fact, if you look at Spain and France, they've had high-speed rail networks for decades in some cases. This is basic infrastructure in most of the rest of the world, and we're arguing over a 210-mile line. It's fairly pathetic.
They're going to scrap the second leg, though, aren't they, Labour?
I hope not.
Way, right?
I really hope not. I mean, there's clearly this kind of act of political vandalism that Rishi Sunak announced yesterday of selling off the land that's been bought. They spent £500 million buying land between Birmingham and Crewe for that second phase, 2B of HS2. And then they seem to be getting rid of that and saying they're going to sell off the land. Clearly, if that's happened by the time Labour get in, that does make it very difficult. But I think we have to try and find ways to obstruct that as much as possible between now and the next election.
Keir Starmer came up an awful lot at Conservative Party conference. Woke Keir Starmer, the man of the meat tax. What does he have to do to, I guess, take himself away from the caricature the Conservative Party tried to paint of him and give us, an election-winning Keir Starmer?
I think he has to focus on the key issues for the people. I mean, he should ridicule all the stuff about meat tax, as you did very effectively with Claire Coutinho last week. It's laughable, and it shows how desperate the Conservatives are. He needs to focus on the cost of living crisis, on public services, you know, the massive waiting lists in the NHS, the underfunding of schools, crumbling schools, and so on. Those core issues for people, and you know, the NHS, the inability to get a GP appointment, all those sort of basic day-to-day things that people are worried about, not the nonsense that was being spouted by Mark Harper and Suella Braverman, their kind of conspiracy theorist nonsense. Ridicule that, concentrate on what matters to normal people.
The thing that I was picking up quite a lot from Conservative MPs who, let's be honest, were pretty gloomy about the state of polls, you know, they're door-knocking, they're getting lots of grumpy voters, is that they feel that Keir Starmer hasn't convinced the public yet. Do you think they're right in that?
Yeah, I've been speaking to people who've been canvassing up in the by-election in Scotland, the Rutherglen and Hamilton West
We
by-election.
can't talk too much about that,
No, of course
Sorry.
not. But if I think of other by-elections that have happened recently as well, then actually the same thing happens both sides of the border. People aren't particularly inspired by Labour, but actually north and south of the border, there is this kind of antipathy, actually, growing antipathy towards the governing party in the UK and in Scotland. And I think that is benefiting Labour. So in a sense, he doesn't have to inspire people. He doesn't have to be brilliant at the moment. He's getting by just by not being the other person. And that may well be good enough to win the election.
Yeah, it seems to be working so far, if the polls are to be believed anyway. Thank you very much for being on the programme. Always good to speak to you. Andrea Fisher there. Let's have a little chat to Nick and Ayesha, shall we? Look at my careful navigation around the set. Let's go and get a bit more of a chat, shall we, about Labour Party conference. Ayesha, what do you think? Do you think that Keir Starmer hasn't managed to convince voters yet?
Well, I kind of agree with quite a lot of what Andrew said there. I mean, let's wait till we get to the short campaign, but certainly right now, the poll numbers are looking really solid for the Labour Party. And at the end of the day, they're the numbers that really, really matter. Labour's in this difficult position. You know, there's a famous phrase that Roy Hattersley used about Tony Blair in opposition, saying Labour in opposition, it's like carrying a Ming vase across a highly polished floor. And I feel like the Labour Party is very, very conscious of that, because the Labour Party has been seen in recent years as you know, too interesting for various reasons. They really want to play it safe. They don't want to scare the horses. They've dealt with things like anti-Semitism within the party. They've got a very, very good sort of shadow cabinet now. They're trying to sort of win the business community. I mean, apparently the business community is flocking to Liverpool next week. Rachel Reeves, her team's been doing a big piece of work with them. So they are playing it safe at the moment, but I can understand why they are doing that. This is probably not the time to take any crazy risks, but I do think some of the things that people would like to see some kind of nod to in Keir Starmer's speech is some of the big things that Rishi Sunak didn't address: housing, social care, you know, gross inequalities in education, that type of thing, the NHS. I think we're not looking for sort of fully flesh-costed ideas, but certainly a nod to a vision around those areas, I think will be quite important.
I think the fact Rishi Sunak totally ignored social care was quite shocking. We've already talked about the economy. But let's talk more about Labour next week. I think, so this was like rugby, the ball is bouncing Labour's way, isn't it? In just about every possible fashion. I still can't quite divine why they are going last. Just to remind your viewers, there's sort of always been a tradition. The Conservatives, in or out of government, has always gone last. And they've been able to say, you saw the brothers down last week at Blackpool and they said this so they could take... And it's quite powerful stuff. Well, that now suddenly is completely presented to Keir. For certainly the first time that I can remember, Labour will effectively wrap up the whole season, which is a real gain, a real plus for them. But to your point, yes, if you talk to my listeners, they probably would say, we want to see a bit more flesh on the bone. Labour probably think, well, why do we want to expose anything good? Because they'll simply nick it. So I think now we are coming to the pressure points. I would argue, and we were chatting about this briefly, I fear it's going to be quite closely managed. I understand why, by the way. I think it's going to be very closely managed, so I don't think there'll be the sort of side stories that we all enjoyed the 2 or 3 days we were up in Manchester. But I do think they've got to throw some stuff out there. I do think there are people who, to your point, they're not quite tuned in to Sir Keir yet. They need to see what the man is about. But, you know, this idea of flip-flop...
If you were still advising Labour, would you be saying...
They'd be in power. This is the reality.
Somehow you'd have magicked the election already.
Yeah.
Would you be saying, look, this is all going our way, don't say anything, just be quiet, just let the intention on the Conservative Party? Or would you be saying, no, come on, you have to get...
Look, I would absolutely be saying don't scare the horses at this point. And also, I think Labour is very, very alive to the fact that as soon as it gets anywhere near tax and spend, an avalanche of criticism is going to come their way. So I would not go that far. But I do think I think people do need to see a little bit more of what Keir Starmer's political mission is, what lies in his political heart. Now, that is different from a story about his mum and dad, by the way. I think everyone has heard that story. What's he angry about? What does he want to fix? How's he going to fix Britain? I think that's the kind of narrative people do want to hear. And that's different from setting out lots of concrete policy. It's about telling a story about what Starmer's Britain would look like.
It is quite hard, because you've interviewed Keir Starmer, I have as well. And
I put calls to him. So it's called Keir. So once a month, it's not me, it's the listeners ring, and they put their questions directly to him.
But it's quite hard to get under his skin, I find
very
sometimes.
hard. Yeah, I mean, he is a professional politician. He's obviously very advanced in law. I think he's a barrister, or certainly a senior solicitor. So, yes, he's very good at that. But actually, he's very warm. I had to say he's very warm with the callers. He can empathise. And it doesn't surprise me, it does surprise me, that hasn't come across more. Because I've seen him take some really quite upsetting calls from people who have family who've got terrible service from the NHS. He's tremendously empathetic, but I don't see that breaking out through the TV screens or through the radio yet.
But I think the other really interesting point about Keir Starmer is he is slightly rare. Remember, like Rishi Sunak, he came into politics only in 2015, not that long ago. Yeah. And before that, you know, he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. He's actually quite a good manager. And one thing that I think he's different from other political leaders, he's not sort of rash to anger in a way that a lot of, you know, because he's sort of come up in a different tradition. He is, I think, quite calm. And I think you've probably seen that with callers and things like that. He doesn't take things like extremely personally, which is a lot. And I think Rishi Sunak's slightly like that as well, because they've come up...
They are a bit similar.
I think they've got some similarities between them.
I've only done a couple of phone-ins with the Prime Minister. I would say that probably his skin seems a little thinner than perhaps Sir Keir's. There was famous that time he actually clashed with a junior doctor over the doctor's strike, which actually you may vaguely recall. Yeah. And the doctor said, I can't believe you're telling me my job. I don't know that Keir would have fallen out, to use your expression. I don't know if he'd have gone down that elephant trap. I think he's just a little more perhaps tuned in.
That's interesting, particularly because, like you say, they're both, in political terms...
New boys.
Little babies,
aren't they? They're quite new. And also, I think in political terms as well, they haven't come from a really big faction. You know, like they've both quite been new kids on the block who were kind of, you know, had quite stratospheric careers through the ranks. So it's not like they're creatures of a particular wing of the party. Now, that may come to be a problem for them at some point, but I think they've got a less passionate, more managerial approach and a more pragmatic approach to their politics.
All to play for in Liverpool, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. See you guys there.
See you there. We'll be having a good time. We'll be having a good time.
Unfortunately for some of us around here, some enjoy conferences more than others. Coming up on the Politics Hub, we're going to take a look at some past political Photoshop faux pas after Rishi Sunak was wrongly accused of online fakery.
Extremely successful journey, especially for the kids. And I couldn't be more proud of them. That's why in this series, I think it's real interesting to watch that progression and kind of how this all happened and where they're at today. I don't have any regrets with my family. Why? Because they know how to handle it. They've been doing this since the beginning, I mean, for a long time. And they've had the highs, they've had the lows. They've learned a lot. They know more than I do. I mean, they're out there all the time. They're very sharp. So, and because of that, they've built tremendous businesses.
They did rather well, didn't they? Because one's a supermodel and now one's a billionaire. So you must be extremely proud of your girl.
Well, I got two billionaires right now. And I think the third one's probably on the way.
On their way, 3 billionaires.
Yes, they're creeping in. I can't tell you which one, but yeah. Trans women should not be competing in women's sports, bottom line.
If you'd have transitioned when you were at the height of your career, what would you have done, do you think?
I never would have done that. I never would have. You got to I realize that if you're going through a transition, you're going through that. There's some things you can do and some things you can't do, okay? You can't say, I am not this trans person that goes, I am a woman and, you know, everybody else just quiet down, you know, and you better use the right pronouns. And I am not that. Okay, I'm not even close to that. Okay, I am a young person. I'm a person that suffered from gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is real. Okay, it is real, and it needs to be treated in your own way. But it's very small. There's very few people in the country that really are truly gender dysphoric. And but I suffered with it my whole life. If you had a chance to read my book, Secrets of My Life by Caitlyn
I know
Jenner.
it's from being a small
And
child.
I go through the whole thing, the sneaking around, the lying, the behind closed doors, everything. And I suffered with this my whole life. I raised families and suffered with it, and on and on and on. And I finally got to the point in my life with dealing with gender dysphoria that here I was, like 65 years old. I had done this my whole life, that I'm sick and tired of this. You know, I got to live my life. All my kids are raised. Everything's done.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, there was a minor kerfuffle on social media earlier, and it concerned one of the internet's top obsessions, fake news. Now, this photo on the Prime Minister's X account, I still want to say Twitter, but it's not, it's X. Well, it roused the suspicions of some people because of the one young person wearing a University of Kentucky top. Some people speculating that his social media people had got a stock image and found it searching for UK student, UK being the abbreviation for University of Kentucky. Still with me? Well, in the event, like many conspiracy theories online, it turned out not to be true. But you can see why some people might be dubious, because it wouldn't have been the first time that there was a bit of photoshopping fakery with politicians involved. And this has given us an opportunity to have a look at some of them. Who could forget this? I think it's my favourite one. Grant Shapps pictured with the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But brutal. He was then airbrushed out of history after he fell from grace. Disappearing act. And this portrait of the former Prime Minister David Cameron, well, it provided the perfect base for this. A photoshopped poppy. Some people will wonder why it might have just been easier to get the then PM just to put one on for real, but you know, you never know. And you know what? It is really easy for anyone with a basic knowledge of editing software to have a go at distorting reality. For example, here is Ayesha giving her no, Nick, we'll go Nick first. OK, Nick.
Have I been treated or not? Oh, here we go.
Oh, no. That is Ayesha. There we go. There is Ayesha giving her endorsement to the Prime Minister's new slogan.
Fake news.
I didn't know you were such a fan.
Fake news. Fake news.
And what about Nick? Nick's sympathy with the environmental protests that shut down central London
Oh, right, yeah.
is very well known.
It should be good. Right, hang on.
Here he is, showing solidarity with Just Stop Oil protesters on the streets of London.
Show of Les Mis last night, gluing himself onto the stage.
No way.
You're missing your orange vest, but we'll let you off. We'll let you off.
Just stop toil, more in my case, yeah. Just have a nice break, just stop toil, I'd do
He's
that.
going to glue himself to the desk any minute.
I love this. Hang on. I've been told in my ear to have a look.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, I see. I see what you've done here. This is. Thank you, Mark. I can hear you in my ear, Mark, being like angelic. 3.5 minutes to go. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mark. I'm a Sheffield Wednesday fan, which is why Mark's decided to mop me up with the fierce footballing rivals, the Blades.
That's as brutal as rivalry gets, isn't it?
It's a brutal rivalry, particularly because we're not. Let's say, leading the footballing rivalry with Sheffield United at the minute. So it's painful for me.
There's no joy in Sheffield.
I'm going to talk to you later. But anyway, the online photoshopping is it's hilarious.
It's hilarious, but the kind of serious thing is advances in AI coming down the track, and there's going to be a point where the sort of deep fakes are going to be really, really scary, and they're going to be used to sort of manipulate politics. They're going to be used to manipulate all kinds of bad things. But the thing about fake news as well, and I thought, you know, Andrew Fisher mentioned that your interview with Claire Coutinho was really, really interesting. One of the things I think we should be quite troubled by what we saw at this conference and the run-up, particularly with the net zero thing, there is a real distortion of truth going on from some Conservative ministers. The 7 bins thing that clearly was not happening. the meat tax nonsense. Now, I think, look, there's always been political spin since the beginning of time, but you have to have a line in the sand where you can't say things, you can't just make things up.
What about Labour as well, though? It feels to me like they're prepared to fight a bit dirty on this too. I'm thinking about those attack ads on Rishi Sunak. You know, does Rishi Sunak think that people who commit child sex offenders should go to jail?
I'm just still chuckling about what your team have done because I've got this lovely image that... Because let's face it, some people are watching Sky News, it's sort of on in the background because it's in all our homes. And so they've seen this parade of powerful women up at Conservative Pub trying to become the new leader. We've obviously had Priti Patel, we've had Kemi Badenoch, we've had Suella Braverman. Some of us are like, dear God, even she's going for it now. They've gone for Ayesha, Hazarika.
That's so true.
Where is my party going?
Yeah.
Another brown woman.
Have you heard who they've got for now?
Can I just say, thank you. Pray for my mentions now, from the hard left up to that. Thank you so much.
You need that for your toilet wall.
You know what, I'm going to make sure we delete them from the surface. What about you, Just Up Oil, though? I'm not sure...
Yeah, I don't know if that's quite so funny, in all honesty, because, I thought what they did last night was absolutely terrible. You spend all that money and you want to go to the theatre. I do think they cross a line. But they've got a point to make, and we all know that, so we understand that. But no, it's Ayesha that really... Oh, there I go again. It's Ayesha. Yeah.
I'm the one that's...
I think I've only got one shirt, actually.
I love how happy you look in that picture.
Just
absolutely loving it.
I'm the one whose reputation's been utterly trashed here tonight.
You will come back on the show, though, right?
Maybe. No, but I do love the other thing about the Just Stop Oil thing. Look, you're right, they have a serious point. I mean, the figures out today about the temperature going up and things like that. So but probably the people going to Les Mis are really supportive of their... You know what I mean? Like, if you're sort of a theatre going, you're probably very supportive of that. It's that struck me as the wrong place to be doing it. I would have thought they would have done more at Tory party conference, to be honest.
Again, I'm not supporting it, but you'd have thought if any... And again, I don't want anything disrupted, but if they wanted to make the point, you've got the PM, you've got the Chancellor, you've got the Energy Secretary, you've got everyone on... And again, I'm not urging them to storm the barricades at Manchester, but you'd have thought it would have been more appropriate than the theatre.
We're out of time.
Can I get a joke? I want the Jeremy Hunt joke.
Not on air, remember?
Oh, OK.
Not on air. I'm in enough trouble after tonight's show.
I will see you guys in Liverpool.
Absolutely.
I'll try and find out the joke and maybe put it on Twitter for anyone who's really desperate to know, just to make sure that no one's left out. That's all for tonight. Remember, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all the latest on the Hub throughout the day. SJ...